What are you hearing about the decision, again, that just happened just a few minutes ago? And then also tell us what happens now.
Yeah, Britt, this was one of those rare moments on Capitol Hill where anything that a member of Congress said was going to be news. In that case, Bill Cassidy. That's because Bill Cassidy was the make or break vote on whether or not Todd Blanche would become the permanent attorney general. If he voted no, then Blanche's nomination would have failed at this moment. If he voted yes, then it would sail through. And of course, he has voted yes. Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski are the two Republicans who are voting against Todd Blanche. And of course, as you mentioned, McConnell still absent and unable to vote. And this was a very long-winded road to lead Bill Cassidy to this moment. He has voiced a number of concerns about Todd Blanche in the past, including having to do with that anti-weaponization fund, with the IRS audit immunity, and then whether or not Todd Blanche would serve as an independent attorney general, given the fact that he was previously President Trump's personal attorney. And Bill Cassidy laid that all out on the table in that floor speech he just delivered within the past hour, saying essentially that Todd Blanche isn't perfect, but he's better than somebody else who could come along as acting attorney general who maybe isn't as qualified. Also, Bill Cassidy made the case that it's important to have a Senate confirmed attorney general rather than an acting attorney general. And at the end of the day, he said, I am going to vote for Todd Blanche. I may be criticized for it, but what's new? Now, what brought him to this decision seems to be a bevy of conversations that he had in recent days, including as recently as last night, including with former Attorney General Bill Barr, two U.S. attorneys in Louisiana, as well as Senators Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins, the two no votes, and Thom Tillis and John Cornyn, the two yes Republican votes who were on the fence for a while before they struck that deal with the DOJ over the anti-weaponization fund and the IRS audit immunity. So that all being said, Todd Blanche will have the votes to move forward and become the permanent attorney general. Just when that vote will happen is still up in the air right now. The Senate working through a number of procedural hurdles as they try to finish up their business before heading home for the August recess. But certainly they are going to be able to check a very big item off their to-do list, that being confirming Todd Blanche as the permanent attorney general.
Yeah, it really came down to the wire here. Eugene, what was interesting is that the senator did get emotional at the end of his speech there. But why do you ultimately think that he decided to fall in line with Republicans?
Well, number one, because Republicans always do. I mean, how many times have we seen Murkowski and Collins being the only no votes? Look, I can take him at his word that he thought that Todd Blanche was better than any likely alternative. But let's keep in mind, first of all, yes, Cassidy was the vote that was outstanding. So we didn't know which way he was going to go. So he was, in that sense, the key vote. But every Republican senator, except for Collins and Murkowski, also voted to confirm Todd Blanche. And so what did they just do? Well, they voted to confirm the guy who's been doing everything he can to bury the Epstein files. That's one thing they did. They voted for the guy who tried to his best to establish this $1.8 billion fund for the January 6th rioters, and who maybe not has reluctantly agreed not to give, total immunity, maybe to the president for, well, I guess he has given immunity for past tax violations, and he claims to have limited it that somehow. But that's the guy they all voted for, and I think if I were advising Democrats running in Senate races, I would advise them to hold every senator who voted for Todd Blanche accountable for those things.
But just to follow up on something you said at the beginning of your answer, couldn't you also argue that he had a lot of reason not to fall in line with Republicans?
Well, yeah, because Donald Trump ended his political career. But remember, yes, Cassidy has in some ways bucked Trump, here and there. But on the other big vote that he took, which was to confirm RFK Jr. as HHS secretary. Cassidy ultimately voted to confirm him. And look how that has turned out. I mean, listen to what Kennedy has been saying the past few days, essentially trying to promulgate quack science and clearly making the nation unhealthier. And so, again, Cassidy talks a bigger game than he walks.
Ken, some of the concern out there is that now that Blanche is confirmed, there's going to be this about face. He won't be able to keep the promises that he made when it comes to the anti-weaponization fund, when it comes to the Epstein survivors. Are you anticipating any significant policy changes here?
In terms of whether he violates his promises to senators, that's anyone's guess, Britt. It's a great question, and it's something they all should have factored in. And of course, they will have no leverage whatsoever if he does that. Look, it's very clear, as Eugene said, that Senator Cassidy and also Senator Cornyn and Senator Tillis viewed Todd Blanche as the least of a series of bad options. That's where we are as a country right now. They know that Todd Blanche has transformed the Justice Department in a way that violated decades of norms. They know that. They all know that. Todd Blanche knows that he's doing the bidding of Donald Trump in a way that no attorney general ever has in American history, that he is overseeing investigations of Donald Trump's political opponents. Cassidy mentioned that he oversaw the creation of this weaponization fund that he's now saying won't happen, but there's no guarantee. There's nothing that would stop the Justice Department from settling individually with January 6 defendants or others that Donald Trump wants to get to receive millions of dollars from the taxpayers. So it's really a remarkable situation we find ourselves in, but that's where we are as a country, Britt.
Cornell, what do you think about this? Is there anything that Democrats can do to sort of take this moment, maybe even take the process to get to this moment and use it to their advantage as we head towards the midterms, perhaps?
Well, let's connect the dots here, right? So you listen to Cassidy, give that struggle to give that rationale for voting for this person. And as Eugene said, I don't want to underline this, right? This is someone who's gonna been burying the Epstein files and has had a back and forth about a slush fund for people who attack the Capitol. None of these are things that are in the voters' best interest. None of these things actually address the American public and their interests. And here's someone who is the criticism is leveled, and it's fairly spot on, that this is the Donald Trump's attorney general is going to be doing the bidding of Donald Trump, not the American people. And so you have Republicans fall in line. Now, connect the dots back to this. The vast majority of voters right now want someone who will actually put a check on Donald Trump, not fall in line with Donald Trump. That's the vast majority of voters. And you see Cassidy, again, like all Republicans, fall in line, knowing that what they're doing isn't right, but doing it anyway. And it just drives the thirst for voters to want to put a check on the president, and not someone who's going to say, well, this is the best that we can do. No, voters are angry. They're angry that their issues aren't being addressed. They're angry that the president and corruption seems to be winning the day. And this is just more of the same of this. So can Democrats use this? Yeah, they have a plethora of this, but this is reinforcing the narrative that that's already beginning to be baked in, and the reason why the vast majority of Americans now want someone who will put a check on Donald Trump. And Republicans don't seem to be up to the job.
Yeah, sort of that anti-Trump strategy that we've seen from Democrats in the past months. Eugene, a lot of focus right now is on Senator Cassidy, of course, but just this morning, Senator Murkowski's voting no, joining Senator Collins as well. Do you think their no votes are on principle, or are they just distancing themselves from Trump over their own electability? I mean, what are the motives behind their no votes?
Well, let's take them individually. Lisa Murkowski is not hesitant to get on Donald Trump's bad side, and he has tried to knock her off. He has tried anything he can to damage her political standing, and he can't. And she knows it. This is a woman who won a write-in campaign for that seat in Alaska with a name like Murkowski that voters had to write in. So she's got such a solid political footing that she can do what she thinks is right, and that's what she did in this case. Susan Collins. I can't read Susan Collins' mind, but obviously she's in a tough race this year, and she doesn't want, she doesn't want to be tied that closely to Donald Trump in a state that is blue. The state that does not like Donald Trump. And so did that play a role in her calculation? I'm sure it did. I don't know what she really thinks about Todd Blanche, but I think she did what she knew was politically necessary for her.
Ken, to that end, do you think there's going to be some pretty strong direct conversations happening behind closed doors right now over those no votes?
Look, what I can tell you is that at the Justice Department, Britt, there are some very strong conversations going on about how bad morale is. I had a text from a source over there who said that they could not believe that Senator Cassidy described morale as high at the Justice Department. The person said, "What is he smoking?" Because the career employees of the Department of Justice are beside themselves with the direction that Todd Blanche has taken the department. They know that he was a prosecutor for 9 years, and they are just utterly perplexed at some of the decisions he's made and very depressed about what the road forward looks like. We're only a year and a half into this term. Thousands and thousands of Justice Department employees have been driven out or have left or have retired, both at the FBI, at the DOJ, and at the DOJ. And there's a lot of road left to travel here along this path that Donald Trump wants to take the Justice Department.